Reject Jim Chalmers' backhand cash ban, and Albanese's sellout tour. Coming up on the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 23rd of October 2025. I'm Richard Bardon, and I'm joined this week by Citizens Party organiser and Citizens Report producer Benjamin Pearce. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Richard.
So on this week's show, we're going to cover the government's latest attempt to help the banks get rid of cash while pretending to support its continued availability and use. And we're also going to talk about what Mr. Albanese has been up to on his little trip to Washington, hobnobbing with the great and the good, as he would have it.
Our president, if you'd believe the media's portrayal of it all.
Yes, the old 51st state. But first, a quick update. Speaking of how America runs the place. So we talked last week about how Daniel Duggan, the Australian citizen, former United States Marine fighter pilot, who's been wrongfully jailed for 3 years now, despite having broken no Australian law, and nothing he's alleged to have done having been illegal at the time that he did it anyway, training Chinese pilots at a flight school in South Africa in 2011, and then locked up on trumped-up charges for this anti-China political agenda that the Americans have been pushing in earnest since the first Trump administration, and of course it's been going on for many, many years, as we've been reporting. So we talked last week about, we played some videos of the rally that one of our party's co-founders, Nolene Isherwood, addressed, along with some other people, in support of Dan and his family, and calling for his release, and for the government for the court and the Attorney General to reject the extradition application. So that hearing took place obviously later that day, and there's an update on that in the organising report in this week's Australian Alert, our weekly magazine. But the upshot is that Dan and his team, Dan did get to appear in person. You're not even guaranteed, he basically has no rights in this situation because of the way that they've cooked the law. Because he hasn't been charged with anything, if he had been, he would have more rights than under Australian law than he has in having not been charged with a crime. But in any case...
Hasn't even broken our laws.
As I said. And so the hearing was confined to arguments questioning the legality of the extradition, including the issues that we've often raised here of dual criminality, how the alleged crime has to have been a crime in both jurisdictions in order for an extradition to be legitimate. And also retrospectivity of this legislation where, as I said, it wasn't, nothing he's alleged to have done was a crime under Australian law at the time. He denies any wrongdoing under United States laws, his residual obligations from his military service either. But in any case, the legislation to make that a crime in Australia didn't pass until long after not just the activity in question, but his arrest and imprisonment. So that was the barristers' arguments. They were very thorough, Nolene reported, and the judge, who is apparently an expert in this area, his name's Justice James Stelios, and he's the former head of the law school at the Australian National University in Canberra, where this hearing happened. He was very attentive throughout, very focused, obviously following the arguments very closely, and Dan was able to express his gratitude to the judge for allowing him to be there in court and have his day in court, and not deprive him of that right. And the Attorney General's Department asked that he not be allowed because they don't want him there. They just want to railroad him without having to look him in the eye.
We've had two Attorneys General, Mark Dreyfus and now Michelle Rowland, who have just let this thing continue, showing that it's not about the truth or what Dan Duggan didn't do. It's a political agenda, pure and simple.
Which is also another reason that he shouldn't be extradited, because these are political charges, and that's a no-no.
But it's a question of our national sovereignty.
Yeah, as Dan himself has always emphasised. So the court has reserved judgment, and we will keep you up to date. As soon as we know anything, we'll make sure you know. And in the meantime, we'll maintain contact with Dan's supporters, his family, his legal team, and continue to help with anything that we can to make sure they get the support we need. They need, I should say. And before we get into the show proper, just say the way we do keep people up to date besides these videos, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, comment below to stir up the algorithm, and like, share, subscribe, and ring that notifications bell when you subscribe so that it actually tells you when we post a new video, and check that from time to time. Apparently people have been getting bumped off. And the other way that we keep people up to date is this magazine, the Australian Alert, that we produce every week. You can subscribe to that. You can call in if you haven't already to get a free copy, sample copy. And we are also on a membership drive, and we're a political party, as Robbie, our regular host, always says. We don't just talk about this stuff, we do something about it and tell you what you can do, and that depends on us getting the material, the financial support that we need to operate. We don't take any corporate money. So if you...
The banks channel millions into the major parties. All these corporations, monopolies, oligopolies, and the minerals companies, the energy companies, they're all pouring money into the major parties to do what they want. The Citizens Party doesn't take donations from any of them, just average Australians around the country, mums and dads, business owners and so forth, that recognise the ideas that we fight for are necessary if we're going to get our national sovereignty back and build the kind of future that this nation, I mean, we're blessed with so many resources and so much potential for development. We're squandering it and just sacrificing it to this corporate empire, this Anglo-American system that's destroying us. So the only way that's going to change is with action. And as a federal political party, we require donations in order to do the work that we do. So click the link below, donate to support our efforts. You'll hear more about it in this show, and as you have been for many years now. But the membership question is important as well, because in order to get the message out, we want this party, these are primarily federal issues that we fight for. We've been a federally registered political party for a long time, but we need to get these ideas out at that state and local level and recruit people to this fight, have them participate in the activities that we're engaged in day to day, week to week, activities that you yourself, the viewer, can be engaged in as well. But becoming a member helps us to get the party registered in every state and contest state and local elections as well. So we require a lot of members to do that. It varies from state to state. We're aiming for 750, I think that's the requirement, 750 members in New South Wales is the requirement. We're in the process of getting the party registered in New South Wales. We've got South Australia done. We'll be looking at getting all the other states, of course, as well. But we need members to do it. So click on the link below, become a member of the party, and help us engage at all those different levels and and get the word out and fight state and local as well as federal.
Yep. So all those links are below, including the donate button. And if you haven't already, you can call in and get a free copy of the Australian Alert and get the in-depth detail on all this that we don't have time to cover in the show. So, to our first topic, reject Jim Chalmers' backhand cash ban. And what we're talking about here is a quick recap of the history of this campaign. Back in 2017, the Liberal government, Scott Morrison was Treasurer, and then he became Prime Minister, and Josh Frydenberg took over the Treasurer's job. They launched a thing called the Black Economy Task Force, led by a former global head, the only Australian to be, at that stage at least, a global head of one of the big four accounting and auditing firms, the late Michael Andrew, he died a couple of years ago, to cook up a justification to restrict the use of cash in the Australian economy. So the report in 2017 recommended initially banning cash transactions above $10,000, but ultimately bringing that down to $5,000 or even $2,000 and force everything else to go through the banks, through the digital systems, electronic funds transfers. Now their excuse was that this was supposed to curb tax dodging, money laundering. They were blaming tradies and hairdressers. But of course, when you look at the numbers and look at the official figures as we did, Australia didn't really have any major cash-based black economy anyway. The real black economy, money laundering, tax dodging, terrorism finance, is all done through and by corporations, major banks, through tax havens and shell companies that are designed and overseen by those same big four accounting firms. And the real plan, as we pointed out, was to trap people in the banks. The banks, for commercial reasons, they want to control, they want to monitor everything you do, they want to take a cut of every transaction. They want to monetize the data that they collect on you and profile you and sell that to their other clients, their corporate clients, advertisers. And from the government's perspective, they, at the time, were toying with the idea of negative interest rates, as the Europeans and Japanese had done, and of course the long-standing IMF and Bank for International Settlements bail-in agenda to steal your money out of your accounts, like what happened in Cyprus in 2013, so that obviously if you can't keep and spend large amounts of cash, your money's, and they made it harder and harder to get cash, you are stuck in the bank and they can lock your account down and pinch it. So that was the agenda. The government intended to legislate this in September of 2019, wave it through and have it come into effect on the 1st of January 2020. Of course, we all remember what was happening in the world in January of 2020, and then the Mr. COVID arrived in Australia in early February. But in any case, they couldn't get away with that because we mobilised, we heard about it, John Adams, the independent economist who we've worked with, Martin North, who is a very highly qualified and sought after financial analyst, and has his own YouTube channel that he talks about this stuff on, so go check that out. It's called Walk the World, highly recommended. We mobilised, we put the word out, made it politically radioactive, kryptonite. 3,620 submissions to Treasury in a 2-week consultation, then another 3,000 to a Senate inquiry in the meantime, and a nod to the late, great Senator Alex Gallagher, Labor Senator from Western Australia, I believe, who really took this on. And of course, independents and minor parties like Bob Katter, One Nation, in the meantime, started speaking out publicly, drew a lot of mainstream media attention to the issue, and it became too hot to handle. Frydenberg shelved it, put it in the broom cupboard to die, and eventually, in December of 2020, Senator Malcolm Roberts of One Nation's motion to dump the cash ban bill passed unopposed on the 3rd of December of 2020. So since then, the Liberal and then Labor governments have been allowing the banks to push the cashless agenda on their own for supposed commercial reasons.
Well, they couldn't get the law through on behalf of the bankers, so the bankers just turned around and started doing it themselves by closing branches.
Yeah, and particularly when the pandemic came along, Channel 7 News reported in June of 2020, the 19th of June, that the banks had boasted of using the pandemic to, as they put it, ram through their cashless economy agenda, because despite everything they say about, we're following our customers, they're voting with their feet. Mm-hmm. They had a 5-year plan. This is the banks behaving as, remember Kenneth Hayne, the Royal Commissioner, are you acting as one? Yes, they are. It's called cartel conduct. They had a 5-year plan to reduce cash use, but achieved their goal in 10 weeks. Their five-year goal in 10 weeks because of the pandemic, where people had been made afraid, mistakenly, erroneously, to handle cash. Even though the RBA itself had said that there was no issue there. Our banknotes are actually the safest to handle. During just that 6 months from when COVID started to when that report came out, the big four banks had closed 170 branches during lockdown months, some of which never reopened. And now Bendigo Bank is getting in on the act of closing branches, ripping out agencies. They, as we've been talking about, have closed 38 branches and 38 branches and agencies, 22 of which are the last full banking or genuine banking services in their town. And we can go here to Ben, who has recently attended this week the Bendigo Bank annual general meeting.
That's it.
To put him on the spot about this stuff.
Yeah, actually the current Bendigo Bank CEO, Richard Fennell, who came in 2018, since he came in, Bendigo Bank has actually closed 56 last branches in town since shifting to this new model of being the better big bank that Bendigo Bank is trying to be. Why you'd want to be associated with the big banks, particularly given the growing dissatisfaction with the big four amongst the population. The branch closures not helping that any. 56 branches since 2018. So, and this is the bank that had the community bank model. So I went to this AGM. It was held in Bendigo on the 21st, 2 days ago, Tuesday, and it was held in the centre of town in Bendigo at the Alhambra Theatre there, attended by perhaps rough guess about 100 people. I was there. We had a bank warrior who, his name is Michael Sanderson. We've shown a number of videos of him getting up at these bank meetings.
Yeah. Bank Warriors is the name of the group.
Yes.
He's one of the leaders of that. People who have been shafted by the banks and are fighting back instead of just copping it.
Mm. So they get shares in the bank and then they attend the AGMs and ask them the tough questions that investors aren't really inclined to ask.
Nor reporters these days.
Nor reporters, that's right. The Financial Sector Union also had representation there. As I was walking into the building, in fact, I had to walk up these steps, and there were about 4 of them handing out flyers out the front, this little one here, which is virtually entirely about the issues of branch closures. So good on them for doing that. More about, I mean, the question is, do you know what you're investing in at Bendigo? Is this really the bank you want to invest in? I'd like to see the Financial Sector Union, I think we all would, get behind the post office bank solution. But you know, perhaps that's something we can collaborate with them on in future. The one kudo to them is that they did ask, they asked about 4 questions in the meeting, and one of them was actually about the branch closures. I was able to ask 2 questions on branch closures specifically, and Michael Sanderson, he had a lot of questions prepared, 9. He got to ask 6 of them. There's multiple segments of the meeting that they have. There's general business at the start, and then there's electing various new members to the board or whatever. And at each point, there's opportunity for questions. And Michael's the kind of guy who really does his research. He knew who these people were, and he was able to ask questions related to their election or their position with respect to the issue of branch closures. In fact, I'm pretty sure 5 of his 6 questions were specifically related to branch closures. But unfortunately, he wasn't actually able to attend in person. So he was participating online and had to deal with
The usual technical problems.
well, restrictions. The questions were limited to 532 characters. And they said it in the meeting, but obviously it was enforced online. There was a limit of 2 questions per individual, per section.
A session of the meeting. So
Yeah.
you have a recap of those questions and the answers?
They haven't published the transcript or the video yet online, so can't show any video, and I wasn't able to take notes on everything. I do have notes on the questions that I asked though, so I'll go through some of those, but I'll just quickly mention Michael made the point that Section 250S of the Corporations Act requires that they actually allow shareholders to ask their questions and give them due consideration and address those questions. So these sorts of restrictions are little games that these banks like to play. The other ones do it as well, Michael was telling me. And unfortunately, I got asked two questions in the general business at the start, expecting time at the end to ask other questions, and that didn't happen. They just closed it down. So lesson learnt for future. But the questions I asked were, last year a Senate inquiry recommended that the Australian government adopt a policy recognising access to financial services as an essential service, and to investigate the feasibility of establishing a publicly owned bank, including within the branch network of Australia Post. Are you preparing for franchisees to jump ship if a government bank offered them a better deal and left them to do their jobs as community banks? I mean, the responses were predictable. I can basically give you a sense from the notes. This is basically what he said, but again, a transcript hasn't come out, so I might be off on a few words here and there. But the response...
Well, just the gist of it, this is not a direct quote. Richard Fennell, don't sue us.
The problem is there's so much waffle. It's hard to tie it together. No, we're not preparing for them to jump ship. The community banks are important to Bendigo Bank and our network. We remain absolutely committed to ensuring that they continue to partner and work with us. We do understand that banking services more broadly need to be provided. Of course, they mention bank at post, effectively deflecting the question away from a post office bank onto bank at post, as we've seen them do so many times before.
Palming customers off onto the taxpayer and small business licensees' expense, rather than providing the service that they're supposed to provide while the bank takes all the profit.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many limitations to bank at post, they've been mentioned in inquiries and these sorts of venues before, and they just keep saying it, right? But that was expected. They did say that they spend time in Canberra having these discussions through the Australian Banking Association as well.
Which is their lobby group.
Yeah, and we remain committed to our community bank model, even though we're, shutting down all these branches. And there was a section at the start, the general business, where they summarised all the business of Bendigo Bank over the last financial year, and they made the point of supporting local communities and so forth in the community bank model, but then they close all these branches. It's just platitudes. They use all these terms and figures, and none of it means anything. I felt dumbed down by it actually, but there's nothing concrete or meaningful like thanks to our community model branch, we're helping make these local towns more viable, the football team surviving and this bridge got built and that sort of, they don't talk about that. It's
and of course on the subject of local towns, one that we've been talking about on this show is the Queenstown branch in Tasmania.
Yep.
The last bank on the entire west coast of Tassie. And now they've got to drive over icy mountain roads and switchbacks, blind corners, logging trucks, and all sorts of mess. Because that's how Bendigo Bank supports their community. So you...
or an entire coast in this case. I mean, talk about responsibility to the community. I mean, this was a particularly egregious example, but they couldn't even wait around. There was a festival on last week. I've forgotten the name of it off the top of my head.
Where the population of more than the entire west coast comes into that one town to spend money, and now they can't.
And they had the lease on the venue for the branch until March next year or something, sometime around then. And they closed it well ahead of then and before this festival.
So you got to ask a question about Queenstown?
I did. I asked, did the Queenstown branch stop being profitable in the 2 years it was back under corporate control? And if so, how? To which the response was, and again, few words might be out here, but we do not provide individual branch profitability numbers. However, the reality of that branch, we were only able to open that branch 2 days a week for a total of 11 hours. The costs of fitting out, maintaining a branch that is only operating for 11 hours a week, including security requirements and the like, was a significant cost for the very limited demand in that town. It was a difficult decision. We've spoken at length to the community down there. We understand the disappointment of some community members, but the reality is that the demand for in-branch services did not align with the value we saw in keeping that branch open on an ongoing basis. Happy to say all that, but we won't talk about the profitability of it.
Whereas we know from our work and our discussions with the community that, as we've reported on this show, that the bank restricted the hours first and people were lining up out the door in the hours it was open. So all of this is the usual bank lies, a bunch of liars doing all this to justify their pre-existing, to cook the figures and destroy these communities in the process to justify their existing agenda.
I think also just to state that it's good to go to these events and put them on the spot. They're not changing their line though. They're continuing with this agenda and they will do so. We know how arrogant these banks can be. The only way it's ever going to change is with political activity, with an organised response from the population, and we're continuing to engage with the people of Queenstown and many other towns on this issue, but it takes the engagement from the population with their members of parliament raising these issues, and most importantly raising the very, very simple and straightforward and low-cost solution to keep banking services in these towns and bring these other banks into line, and that is a public post office bank. That's the solution. And the more people that engage with their members of parliament and senators promoting this idea and joining the Citizens Party, again, become a member, helping us do this, that's the only avenue through which this kind of a change is actually going to happen. Bendigo Bank certainly is showing the same arrogance as the other banks. They're just going to keep going with their agenda.
And speaking of political activity, which we've kind of buried the lead a little bit there, but as I mentioned, the government is now coming back to helping the banks get rid of cash on the pretext of protecting it. So late last year, which we reported at the time, there was a proposal for a cash mandate, but it exempted some 90% of businesses below a certain size and turnover. So we opposed that and said, no, you need a proper cash mandate, but we need a postal bank, a government bank operating through post offices to make sure that businesses have somewhere to bank that cash and get their floats. Last week, Chalmers, the Treasury, I should say, put out a new consultation paper for, they couldn't get legislation through, so they're going to do it through regulations. Delegated legislation signed off by the Governor-General, and that's all you get. No parliamentary debate, no nothing. One of our executive members, Glenn Isherwood, who's one of the leaders of our parliamentary work, along with Robbie Barwick, goes and talks to these, tries to talk some sense into these major party politicians and all of the independents, help get this information and coordinate these actions, these mobilisations that we work with these independents and minor parties on. Has recorded a video on this that's going to tell you all about it. It goes for about 4 minutes. We're going to roll that now.
Last week, the federal government released an exposure draft of a new set of regulations that they intend come into effect on the 1st of January 2026. This relates to the use of cash. It's called the Competition and Consumer Industry Codes Cash Acceptance Regulations 2025. Don't be fooled. It says cash acceptance. For months now, they've been talking about a cash mandate. Andrew G., Bob Catter, and Dai Lei last year moved a bill, or were preparing to move a bill to mandate cash across the Australian economy. And Jim Chalmers came in and said, just wait, we'll help you. And so Jim Chalmers has come up with this as the counter proposal to a full-blown Australia-wide, economy-wide mandate of accepting cash in all businesses. So, even though it says cash acceptance, it is not. This is the anti-cash acceptance, anti-cash mandate regulations that the government has just come out with. This takes us further down the pathway of a cashless society where cash is being removed from the economy. This does the work of the banks. So, this is not a bill. This is a set of regulation changes that are coming from the Federal Executive Council that will be signed off by the Governor-General to modify under existing laws, consumer laws, the rules about accepting cash. And what are they? 1, cash only needs to be accepted by supermarkets and petrol stations, and only up to $500. That is, if you have a petrol station or a supermarket making over $10 million a year. Every other small business, medium-sized business in the country is exempt from having to accept cash if they don't want to. So the government with this is setting out regulations that give the green light for any business in Australia to treat cash as optional. That is the opposite of what we need. We need the Citizens Party calls for an industry, Australia-wide, economy-wide cash mandate. If you've got an ABN, if you've got a shop front, if you deal with the general public consumers, you should be accepting cash as legal tender to settle debts. That's what we support. This is not that. So, they are holding a consultation period where the public can put their submissions in for the next 2 weeks. Effectively, this you can have your say on this up until October 31. We're calling on all watchers of this video, log your protest to this. Oppose this, because we've already seen where this goes. In Sweden, in Scandinavia, they went down the cashless path. Now the governments over there are reversing the very policies that they once supported, because they are recognizing they need to support cash. When the power goes out, when there's a natural disaster, when you're dealing with people who are technically challenged, disabled, homeless, these people need access to cash. And when you remove the infrastructure, when you remove it, it supports the banks going more digital. It's very, very hard to get it back. So Jim Chalmers ought to see this happening. He should be able to see what's happening in Europe and how they're saying, whoopsie, let's reverse what we've done. But no, they're doubling down. And that is because the major parties are captured by the bank lobby, the Bankers Association, and a Bligh, and on it goes. So I'm calling on all watchers of this video, oppose this. Get on, write a submission to oppose these changes. If you want, what we would recommend is the only mandate we accept for cash is economy-wide, all businesses, no exceptions. It's the legal tender of the country. Keep your cash, keep your freedom.
So you can see from that, they are not playing this straight. This is just an excuse on the pretext of protecting and mandating the acceptance of cash. Other than a handful of businesses, relatively speaking, it's just going to give them a legal avenue to refuse cash while the government continues to allow the big four banks and Bendigo and any others that want to jump on board the program to try and squeeze cash out of the system. So
there'll be a link in the description box below to that Treasury consultation. Make sure you leave a submission. Let's really bring the heat on them and make it known that we're seeing through this for what it really is.
Yep, absolutely. So that's all on that one. On to our next subject, which is Albanese's sellout tour. Now, the wordplay is intentional. Albanese, unfortunately, I'm sorry to disappoint you, has not quit politics and joined a rock band. Music's loss would have been politics' gain. What we're talking about is the fact that Mr. Albanese, over the weekend and this first half of this week, made a special trip to the United States of America to sign over some more of the country to his current boss, Donald Trump. And there are two things which we'll go through. The first is a continuation of what we've reported before, where in 2023, Albanese agreed with then President Joe Biden to have Australia declared a domestic source of material and resources and technologies for the United States military under their Defence Production Act, which, if you read it, and I wrote up an article about it at the time, we can make that available below, but it's all set up for the Americans' benefit. Albanese can talk all he wants about jobs and making things in Australia, but this is all made for the US military that is occupying more and more of this country, setting up bases all over the place, co-opting with the government's assistance all of our industry and our industry policy to supply their war machine. So the big ticket item was this rare earths and critical minerals framework between the United States and Australia they call it the framework for securing supply in the mining and processing of critical minerals and rare earths. These are the essential inputs into virtually all modern electronics, from smartphones to spacecraft and guided missiles, as well as into the specialty steels, alloys, and particularly magnets that China is the world's major producer of, not because it did anything nefarious, but because, one, it has the largest deposits of these rare earth minerals in the world by far, about 44 million tonne of identified deposits. Australia has about 5.7 million. There may be more, we might not have looked for it. But they invested heavily and started pouring money into both mining and refining operations, and also research and development to make new technologies to process and to manufacture and to use these minerals.
Because that's what they do.
Yeah.
China has an economy that's geared towards all of that. We shut ours down.
Yeah, we used to do these sort of things, but it's getting to the point where it's almost out of living memory now.
Yeah.
So, according to Mr. Albanese, in a press release the other day, this is a significant new chapter in the over 70 years of our formal alliance with the United States, he says, that will, not might, not could, will deliver the two countries a secured supply chain for critical minerals and rare earths required for defence and other advanced technologies. Critical minerals including things like battery metals like lithium predominantly, of which Australia has the world's largest and highest quality deposits, but the company that was let in to take a majority stake in the development of that is Chinese. And they built the refinery with their technology. And this is important for reasons which I'll come back to in a few minutes. But early this month, in response to broken deals, broken promises in the so-called trade war between the United States and China, that the United States started, and now it's bit off more than it can chew, the Chinese announced, the Ministry of Commerce announced that they would be restricting exports. They were tightening up their licensing procedures for rare earth metals, components and technologies containing their rare earth metals above a certain proportion, which again they make about 93% of the magnets, 97% of some of the other special alloys and ceramics with these rare earths in them, in order to make sure that they go to civilian uses but not into things like weapons of mass destruction, and of course, for the sake of their own national security, not into American weapons that that the Americans have been encircling their country with, including in Australia, predominantly in Australia in the last few years, for a future war on China if they can't bring it under by other means, which they can't.
And painting a big fat target on our backs in the process.
Yeah, exactly. So the Ministry of Commerce spokeswoman stated that these export controls are designed to prevent the illegal use of rare earths and to safeguard China's national security and global common security. She said, quote, all applications for compliant exports intended for civil use will be approved. So the Americans turned around and said, oh, well, if China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world's going to have to decouple from China, and we're going to be, this is a quote from their Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, former BlackRock guy, hedge funder. We're going to be speaking with our European allies, with Australia, with Canada, with India, and the Asian democracies, the people we're trying to get on our side for this new Cold War or hot war with China.
The democracies.
Democracies as we define them, whether they actually are or not.
Yep.
Because bureaucrats in China cannot manage the supply chain or the manufacturing process for the rest of the world. However, even their own establishment think tanks apparently didn't get that memo, because the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, I should say, pointed out that this is just China responding in kind to a law called the Foreign Direct Product Rule that the United States has been using to restrict computer semiconductor exports particularly, and other things, but mainly that, to China for decades. They brought this thing in 1959. Enables the United States to regulate the sale of foreign-made products. This report by the CSIS states, if they incorporate US technology, software or equipment, even when produced by non-US companies abroad, in effect, if US technology appears anywhere in the supply chain, Washington can assert jurisdiction, end quote. And so, obviously, this is rank hypocrisy. The reason the Americans are so freaked out about it, however, as Professor Warwick Powell, an Australian with some Chinese heritage, hence he's an expert, he speaks the language, he's an expert on the Chinese economy and their model of doing things. And he just said, look, this is just a licensing regime. He said, obviously this is about China's national security first and foremost. He said it's not going to supply the raw materials to somebody who runs around the world telling everybody that China is an adversary and deploying bombs and weapons and missiles around China's periphery. He said you'd have to have rocks in your head to do that. But just as importantly, though, he said China is sending a message to the world that legitimate civilian and humanitarian uses of these materials and technologies would be perfectly fine. But the United States does not like the fact, he said, that its military-industrial complex and its principal tools of global domination, because these metals are required for everything, as I said, from guided missiles to the nuclear-powered submarines.
Yeah.
That we're supposedly getting, but in the meantime they're bringing theirs here because we handed our submarine base over to the Americans over in WA, and we're going to put one in some unlucky city in the East Coast as well, Newcastle, maybe Wollongong.
Are we even going to get the submarines that will, those bases will be used for?
Well, we're going to pay for them.
We'll pay for
either
them.
way.
Yep.
That's part of the deal. Getting them is not, as we've talked about before.
Yeah.
The Americans and the British, who are, of course, the other leg of the tripartite AUKUS agreement, can pull out anytime they want, take all our money and all their technology home with them, and call it a day, should they so choose. So he says the United States doesn't like the fact that its military-industrial complex and its principal tools of global domination are now being strangled by somebody who says enough is enough. And this has been coming down the pipe for a while. Hence, as I said, the USA's turn to Australia. We have 5.7 million tonnes of identified deposits of these rare earths. China has 44 million. The countries in between are all, they're not under the US thumb. So it's places like Brazil, Russia, India, BRICS.
Yeah, BRICS. They're going in another direction.
Yep, a completely different direction based on what they call not just multipolarity, but sovereign equality that the United Nations was supposed to do.
Cooperation, development, solving common problems, and we're going with war.
Yep. And the other country in the list there is Chile, but they don't have an abjectly subservient government to the Americans and, of course, the British like we do. So Mr. Albanese went over there and did the whole happy snaps, grinning like an idiot with Donald Trump, signed this framework that basically continues the process, accelerates the process of handing over control of our resources to the United States, but also makes a claim, sets the stage, as it were, to seize Chinese assets in Australia, including the lithium refinery I mentioned, to give those to the Americans in the same way that Anthony Albanese has already pledged to do with the Darwin port, that the Chinese company took a lease out on Landbridge Group in 2015 and has actually turned into a valuable asset now, and now they're going to steal it off them. So this framework calls for at least $1 billion, $1 billion, count them, financing to projects located in each country in the next 6 months towards what Albanese called an $8.5 billion pipeline of priority critical minerals projects that are supposedly either a couple have already started, the others are supposedly ready to go. There's a gallium project in Western Australia at Wagerup that the government's put a $200 million, so that's nearly 300 million Australian, in concessional equity finance for the project that comes with an offtake agreement. But of course that'll go to the Americans under this Defence Production Act arrangement that I talked about. And a rare earths project in the Northern Territory near Alice Springs called Nolans. The company's called Arafura. That's supposed to produce 5% of the world's rare earths once it's up and running, which is a tiny fraction of what would be needed to replace China, supplant China in the supply chain, but that should be enough for the American military to be going on with for the moment, just for their most crucial weapons of war to keep themselves in magnets that the Chinese won't sell them anymore, that go into the guidance systems for their missiles and other things. So, obviously, if you start seizing Chinese assets, you're going to destroy bilateral relations in a way that Scott Morrison could only ever have dreamed of, with all of his xenophobic behaviour.
Not to mention, it'll send a pretty bad message to anyone else we might want to do trade with.
Yeah, we keep talking about where are we going to get all this investment? Where are we going? How are we going to develop these resources?
Just like allowing the US bases in Australia, the AUKUS agreement itself, there won't be nuclear weapons on these subs, right? You got to look at all of our neighbours in the area, our neighbours who we should have good relationships with, who we should be working with. What message is it sending to them, as well as China? What message is it sending to Indonesia, who's working with China? and other countries of Southeast Asia if Australia is doing this.
And which has raised concerns repeatedly about AUKUS and this US militarisation of Australia that the Australian government refuses to address. Now, the other thing is that to get this up and running faster, they're going to, as they put it, I've got the quote here, they're going to set up a US-Australia Critical Minerals Supply Security Response Group led by the US Energy Secretary and Australia's Minister for Resources, and that's in order of seniority, you can be assured, to identify priority minerals and supply vulnerabilities, develop a coordinated plan to accelerate delivery, invest in recycling technology so that they can scavenge some rare earths from scraps in the meantime. But they are, this framework agreement states, taking measures to accelerate, streamline or deregulate permitting timelines and processes, including to obtain permits for critical minerals and rare earths mining, separation and processing. Now this is a problem. Rare earths, it's a group of closely related metals that they're not actually that rare, but concentrated ores are, and they all occur together, or you get a broad section of them in every deposit. They all have similar chemical properties, and if any industrial chemists are out there, you'll know what I'm talking about. These are very difficult and costly to refine, extract, and process. So what that quote that I just read out means is that they are going to shortcut the approvals processes. They're going to steamroll community opposition. They're going to bypass normal safety and environmental standards. So these hazardous and potentially extremely polluting processing facilities, if anything goes wrong, tailing spills, boiler vessels bursting, anything like this, can get up and running sooner. And as I said, they're committing to, in this framework, develop new or strengthen existing authorities and diplomatic tools that review and deter critical minerals and rare earths asset sales on national security grounds. So there's your claim to, we're not going to officially call you the enemy, but we're going to steal your stuff on the pretext that you are, when it comes to China. Now, the other thing that people might have heard about with Mr. Albanese's trip, because it's been doing the rounds on social media and some of the mainstream media are reporting that the superannuation funds in Australia, that Albanese, and this is the government, the White House, the US Embassy here, put out claims that part of Albanese's deal was that $1 trillion, so there's about 4.2 trillion in our system, to in superannuation money, is going to go make America great again, create American jobs by investing in their stock and in their equities and bond markets. This is actually just what the super funds were already planning to do, because they say, well, our stock market's too small, our returns aren't big enough, we've got to get, apart from the major banks, the most profitable in the world, so they've got to go out and invest in other places. And the United States is such a dynamic economy and all of this.
Because we don't have anything to invest in.
Yeah. So they're running around to where are we going to get the money for all this energy that we need? This green energy that can't actually supply these facilities, but they're pretending they can. At the same time this is happening, Chris Bowen's saying, we need to stop prolonging the life of the coal plants that actually keep the country running, because that's deterring investment in renewable energy. Well, presuming that were worth doing, there's the super funds, $4 trillion, but that's going to America because they said, give us your money. They turned Albanese upside down and shook him until his pockets emptied.
We played an ad in one of our shows a few years ago. I think it was Hawke. Yeah, it was Hawke that presented it on how super would be used to invest in Australia. Yep. In fact, he said it's good for you and it's good for the country.
I remember that.
That's how it was sold.
Yep.
That's the sensible direction for Australia to take.
And now look at it.
Yep. And so now they're giving that to the Americans, along with our minerals and our industrial capacity. Of course, the kicker of it is that Paul Keating later admitted to his biographer, David Love, the book's called Unfinished Business, I believe, Paul Keating's Interrupted Revolution, that it wasn't really about that or about supporting workers in retirement. It was about propping up share markets and a financial services industry to replace the industrial jobs that they had deliberately shut down and offshored and now want back again.
So the ad was bullshit
I think we're
from
allowed-
the get-go.
Yep. All lies. This is what the major parties do. This is who they work for. So if you're sick of that, you want an alternative, you're looking at it. As Ben has said a couple of times, join the Citizens Party, join these campaigns, get onto that submission to the Treasury, the submission portal. You have to do it through the portal now to tell them where they can shove their pretend cash mandate, actual wedge in the door for a cash ban, and keep on to them. We'll keep you up to speed with what's going on with the campaigns to stop AUKUS. We've got a petition for a parliamentary inquiry into that to throw the books open and prove that the whole thing needs scrapping for anyone who's not convinced yet. And of course, the way that we should actually finance our economic development through a government-owned bank that can operate in post offices and be the biggest bank, the biggest retail banking presence in the country overnight, with a couple of phone calls and a piece of this delegated legislation, if he wants, from Dr. Chalmers.
And you want your superannuation money to do something that's good for you and good for the country? Well, we use it to capitalise a development bank, and we can invest in these sorts of things in the interests of Australia's sovereignty, not just developing these minerals, but building the infrastructure we need to increase our standard of living, to benefit future generations, high-speed rail, large-scale dams. We need to develop this country. What China's been doing for 40 years and what China and the other BRICS nations are doing, working with all these other nations in the world, economic development, cooperation, that's the basis for peace. And with it, you don't need to militarize and have forward postures and AUKUS agreements and so forth. All you need, at least perhaps in the coming few generations, maybe not beyond that, but all you need is defense. And if you're developing your economy and your industrial capability and your manufacturing and being able to transport materials around with transportation systems like high-speed rail systems and so forth, and you don't need a big military powerhouse like America to come in and provide a defense. You can do it yourself.
Yeah. And of course, they won't anyway, because there is no alliance. The only commitment is to consult on mutual threats. Pick up the phone. Hey, we're in trouble. Yeah, good. You're on your own, bud. See ya. They've done it before. They'll do it again.
And the fees we're paying them for these things are tribute.
Yeah, this is imperial tribute, and that's all it is.
Yep.
So that's all we've got time for today. Thanks, Ben, for your insight and your AGM report.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching, and tune in next week for more Citizens Report.
Authorised by Robert Bowick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.